at the beginning of the day, Tyler and I promised you that we'd work a little inspiration into the day's sessions. And so with this last session and the one before, we are laying the inspiration on thick. Robert Herjavec was raised, you didn't know? Robert Herjavec was raised on an earthen-floored farmhouse in Croatia. He came to Canada when he was 8 years old, knowing nobody, knowing no English, and knowing nothing about the culture in which a couple decades later he would become an icon. Somehow or other, that 8-year-old stranger to Canada went on to become the founder of the largest IT security company in Canada and one of the largest in North America. In addition to being a business magnate, he's also the star of a certain television show. He's a race car driver on the Ferrari circuit. He's an avid motorcyclist, a one-time star of Dancing with the Stars, and a television show in which he learned not only a couple of moves, but he also met his fiancée of a couple months ago. So, you already know Robert and how approachable he is from Shark Tank. But what you're about to learn is how wise he is as well. And he is proof that in the dog-eat-dog world of business, nice guys finish with a couple $100 million of net worth, some bitchin' cars, and the girl. Please welcome to the stage, Robert Herjavec. Robert, great to see you again.
Nice to see you again. Wow, I'm the closing act.
Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah, all right. No pressure.
No pressure. Wow, John Paul was so motivating.
Oh, he was. Inspirational. Yeah. What a story.
What a story. What he doesn't tell you is when he lived in his car, it was actually a Rolls Royce. But he just kind of glosses over that. No, I'm just joking. Yeah. I'm just joking.
Yeah, it must have been comfortable. All right, but, I mean, talking about inspirational stories, you have nothing to apologize there for, too. So let's start at the beginning. Now, there are lots of different beginnings we could choose. We could choose, the day you were cast on Dragon's Den, which is the Canadian version of Shark Tank, or maybe the time you arrived at Pier 21. But I'd like to go back even farther. Let's go back to a place called Herjavec. Talk about what that meant to you and to your development, what it was like.
So it's interesting. I was born in it's called Zbieg, and
I was close.
You were close, and this is how out there it is. The word actually means escape. So I grew up in a village that people escaped from, and it was kind of a cross-border between different cultures. But at the time, it was a communist country called Yugoslavia, which is Croatia now. But it was great. You don't know that you're poor until you have something to compare to. So it's a very melodramatic, just like John Paul's. I grew up, in a little village with dirt floors, but I loved it. I was a little kid. My grandmother raised me, and I didn't know that we were not well off until we came to Canada. And then I realized, oh, we're poor. Because you compare yourself to the people around you. And where I grew up, everybody lived like us.
Tell me about your parents, they were the ones who made this brave move to leave the place they knew and come to this strange land. What influence did they have on your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I really have a lot of respect for my dad now, but when I was growing up, I was really embarrassed of him. And I think a lot of immigrants go through that. I'll never forget one time I was coming home from school, and I was like 17, 18, and I was with a friend of mine, and my dad was coming down the street, and, he wasn't a style kind of guy. He worked in a factory, and he was working multiple shifts, and he had this Russian hat on and a cigarette out of his mouth, unshaven, and he said hi to me as he was walking by, and my friend goes, "Who's that weird-looking guy?" And I go, "I don't know. Guy lives in our neighborhood." And it's funny because I was embarrassed of him because I felt that he embarrassed me because he was poor, he was rough around the edges, and I just didn't want to be like that. Now, I realize the sacrifice that he went through in order to give me this opportunity. And I'm always a big believer in you can't change the past, but you have to acknowledge why you're here. And I'm sitting here because my dad made an incredible sacrifice to get me here. He didn't have to. He made that choice. And so I always felt that if I didn't do something with my life, like I had this feeling of destiny. The problem was I had no skill and I didn't know how to add value. But I had this incredible sense of desperation that if I didn't do something with my life, all the sacrifice wasn't worth it. And I didn't want to be rich. I mean, not that I have anything against money. I know Kevin was here today, so you guys heard all about the goodness of money. And don't get me wrong, I like money as much as the next business person. But for me, it was always about doing something with my life and achieving some level of greatness. But I just didn't know what or how.
So you tried a lot of things when you were starting out, including show business?
Yeah, I was actually the youngest producer ever at an Olympic event. I field produced, this sounds so grandiose, and trust me, it's not, but I was the field producer for the 14th Winter Olympics in Sarajevo, Yugoslavia, when I was 18 years old. And really
that sounds pretty impressive.
Yeah, but how did I get the job? Because I tried everything. I tried waitering, I tried this, I tried that. And I was working as an editing assistant at a TV station in Canada. And I'm walking through, and the producer just got the rights for the Winter Olympics. And she was in the middle of this big bullpen, and she goes, "Where the hell am I going to find somebody who speaks Croatian by tomorrow?" And literally, I'm walking by with these tapes, and I'm like, "Me?" And she's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "I'm Robert." She goes, "You're going to Sarajevo tomorrow." True story. That was it. I'm like, what do I do? What's a camera uplink? And I took responsibility for it. I'm very adaptable. I'm a big believer that you're never prepared enough for a job that has the potential of greatness. And I've always been different than my friends. My friends have always said, I don't want to go after that job, or I don't want to do that until I'm fully qualified and trained. And my feeling is, you're never going to know everything. You just got to do it, because the best experience is doing it. So I did it. The problem was when I came back, imagine I'm 18, 19, I'm at bars in Yugoslavia, and girls are saying, "So what do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm a producer." And I come back, my head is this big, and I can't get a job. I literally couldn't get a job, and then I tried the computer business. Just
as easy as that? Speaking Croatian wasn't a big advantage in that.
Yeah, so I was working in the film business, and I actually got a really big job with a guy named Tom Laughlin. I don't know if you remember, you're around my age. There was a movie called The Return of Billy Jack. Does anybody remember that movie? And so the lead actor was a guy named Tom Laughlin, and the premise was he was a Vietnam vet, and he comes back, and he knows karate, and he saves these Aboriginal people from these bullies by beating the crap out of them. And Buffy St. Marie had a song, One Tin Soldier, as part of the movie. Mm-hmm. And he was just an actor. They released a movie. The movie flops. Like, absolutely flops. So I think it was Universal. Pulls it. Tom goes to them and says, "I want to buy the rights to the movie." So they sell him the rights to the movie because it's a huge flop. And it's not a great movie, but it had karate and cool music, and it was the hippie thing. We're going in the 60s. And he starts going around universities, putting on displays of karate, playing hippie music, and screening the movie. He does this for 2 years, and then re-releases the movie. Long story made short, it ends up making over $100 million. And in fact, it's one of the most successful independent movies ever released. Anyway, so he was making The Return of Billy Jack many years later, and I was the first director. And by this time, he was a little crazy, right? So he'd fire me, and then he'd call me in the middle of the night crying, "Please come back." And then he'd like, "You're an idiot." And then he'd fire me again. And so one day, I'm sitting at home with my best friend to this day, Steve, and Steve has a computer science degree and a math degree from the University of Toronto. And I have a classical English literature degree. And so I'm sitting around going, oh my God, I hate the film business. People are such idiots. And when you work, you only work for 2 months and then you're unemployed. And he's complaining because he just went for this job interview and he didn't get it in the computer business. And I'm like, computer's boring, who cares? But he says that the job was paying $30,000 a year. So I'm like, what? And this is in the mid-'80s, late 80s, that kind of thing, mid-'80s. And so I'm like, hey, if you didn't get the job, do you mind if I called the guy? And he looks at me and he says, well, I don't think I got the job. I'm like, Steve, you didn't get the job. Trust your gut instinct. And he's still my friend. But he's, so I called the guy up and I say, hey, Steve, blah, blah, blah. So I go for the interview. And the guy was the president of IBM North America. He had left to start his own company. He had no employees. And it made IBM mainframe 3270 terminal emulation boards. I didn't understand any of those words, but it didn't matter. It was $30,000 a year. So I'm sitting down with him. He has no employees, and he's listening to me. He says, tell me about your computer background. I'm like, no. He's like, well, okay, so you have a sales background. I said, well, I was a waiter. So he's like, well, I'm not really sure you're that qualified. And so, blah, blah, blah. But there was something that made me, you have those moments in your life, and I just felt like it was one of those. And I thought, if I'm ever going to change careers, what a great guy to learn from. And I've always been like that. I'm a sponge for information. It's funny, you and I were talking. I was at Nike this morning in Portland, and one of their 11 maxims at Nike, number 8, is be a sponge. And I've always been like that. So I thought, okay, this guy ran IBM. Computers seem to be cool. I think it's the future. So I got to get this job. And so he's getting up, and I say, his name was Denis Ramon. And I say, Denis, you got to hire me. He's like, he says, you seem like a nice kid, but I can't hire you. You don't know computers, you don't know sales. And I said, but you need employees. It's a startup. Just hire me. I'll pack boxes. I'll answer the phone. He's like, no. And he's like almost stopped. I'm like, I'll work for free. So he looks at me and goes, look, I appreciate it, but if I hire you for free, I can't depend on you. And so I don't know where I got the bravado, maybe too much TV, but I put my hand out and I say, no, sir, you can depend on me. And meanwhile, I'm like shaking on the inside. And he looks at me and he starts to put out his hand and he goes, okay. And I go, one condition. If I, on my own, learn enough about this computer stuff that I can do the job in 6 months, you will pay me what you would have paid me if I had the experience. And he shakes my hand, and that's how I got started in the computer business. So, right, great story, right? So I'm
great
like,
story.
woo, I got a job. Woo, I'm not getting paid and I have rent to pay. So I leave the interview, I get in my car and I'm like, holy crap, what have I done? So I say, I got to get a job that pays a lot in a short amount of time. So I drive from that job interview downtown to the fanciest restaurant I could find, walk in, and get them to hire me as a waiter. And so I would work in the computer business from like 5 in the morning till 6, and then I go and waiter until 2 or 3 at night. And that's how I made enough money to pay for rent.
And when did you learn computerese?
So it's interesting, the problem with a lot of people who are very technical, and, to this day, and being on Shark Tank has really helped me with this. When you sell very complicated technology, there's a real art form in simplifying it. So today, I'm I've been in the computer security business now for over 30 years, and I'm very technical, and I know this stuff inside out. But most of the time, it's not what I talk about. I talk about the benefits, and I talk about the value. And so many of my competitors really struggle with that. You know, they go in, they talk about the widgets, and it goes faster. And so you've got to be very clear about what you sell and how to break it down. It's the art of simplicity in technology.
Interesting.
So I just learned it by, the other thing is I'm never afraid to ask customers. So my first sales call, I have this board, and it was like this. And what it did was, at the time, a PC cost $13,000, but it couldn't communicate to an IBM mainframe. But it could do spreadsheets. So you needed a $13,000 terminal to communicate to the mainframe. So people had both on their desk. And you took this board, cost $3,500, you put it in the PC, you don't need the terminal. So it seemed pretty obvious to me, saving money. But the first sales call, I went to a customer, and I was telling him about it, and there was 13 people, engineers around a room, and I was done in 5 minutes. I said, let me tell you everything about this product. And it was 5 minutes. And they looked at me and they go, you don't really understand what the product does, do you? And, I'm a very honest guy, and I said, no, I really don't understand. I said, but let me ask you a question while I'm here. If I was selling this to you and I knew the product, what things would you want to hear? And so they took the board and they're like, oh, it does this, it does this. So I'm writing all this down. And I leave that meeting. I'll never forget the customer. It was Bell Canada, too. I leave that meeting. I go to the next meeting. I take out my pad of paper. And I'm like, here's the 10 features of this product you guys are going to love. That was it.
Wow. That is entrepreneurial.
That is entrepreneurial. But isn't that the definition of being entrepreneurial? Taking nothing or limited resources and making something out of it.
That is truly the classic definition of it. All right, so take us from this moment of brilliant salesmanship to IT security. So that's what you're known for, but you were the salesman who was working off notes that he got from somebody else, and somehow or other you got to be the head of one of the fastest growing IT security firms in North America.
It's interesting, Eric. One of the things I learned in my early 20s, because I think good entrepreneurs are great observers of people. Because at the end of the day, sales is really about human interaction. And as I watched my friends graduating school and getting fancy jobs, one of the things I learned and saw was that they were changing fields. So they were in hardware doing sales, like tools at Black & Decker. And then they would get a job in retail. And they were changing fields. And I noticed that people really want you to be great at a narrow subject matter. And the great thing about the technology business is every 3 years, it kind of reinvents itself. So after a few years, I became one of the top people in a very narrow niche. I was very lucky that security started to grow, but I noticed all my friends who weren't making a lot of money and weren't successful, they were generalists. So they could go to a party, and when we played Trivial Pursuit, they knew a little bit about a lot. I didn't. I knew a lot about a very narrow niche. But it kind of hit me that if you want to make a lot of money, you got to be great at something. And so I thought it was better to be great at one thing than okay at many. So I stayed in the field. I changed jobs and I changed careers, but I always stayed in computer security.
Not to divert from the story of your career, but while we're on the subject of IT security, I have a vested interest in this. It's not a secret that Inc. magazine was recently raided. It was a target of a spear phishing, and we lost a lot of security. For small businesses, what are the things that people need to worry about? The owners of businesses that are sitting in the audience in IT security, are they particular targets because they're small businesses and probably don't have the most up-to-date security? What would be your advice?
Yeah, I think everybody's a target today. And so if you think of cyber crime at its core element. It's the only crime you can commit where you can cause destructive damage, terrorism, steal money, steal identity, and you don't physically have to be there, and your odds of being persecuted are basically zero. The government is never going to go to Russia or China and extradite somebody for stealing your identity. I mean, nobody cares. And what you have to be really aware of is every time you put information somewhere, it's susceptible. And so it depends on the quality of the information, how valuable it is to you. The more valuable the information is to you, the more valuable it is to somebody else. So bank records, customer data, those kind of things. You just got to protect yourself. You've got to update, you've got to patch, and you've got to outsource that function to somebody who knows how to do it, because it's very complicated today. But everyone's at risk. I mean, look at what happened yesterday in Panama. It was the largest customer data breach in history. And it wasn't even from people, it was from a law firm that was setting up trust accounts for offshore people. And it's massive. Here's how massive it is. Eric Snowden was impressed by the size of the data breach. Right? When Eric Snowden says, wow, that's a lot of information somebody stole. You've stolen a lot of information.
Any clue about who did it?
No, I don't think they've been identified at this point. But the issue today is if somebody wants to breach you, they're going to breach you. It's really not about preventing the breach, which you should try to do. The analogy is like your house. It's good to have doors and windows on your house, but realistically, if somebody wanted to get in, they're going to break out a door, they're going to smash a window. So it comes down to response time. How quickly will you know that somebody broke your window? And will you know that they're standing there and still stealing information? The Target was breached 6 to 8 months before they realized it. So the problem is not the fact you're going to get breached. The problem is how quickly can you realize it?
Good, thank you. Back to a question that has been raised kind of throughout this day, and a more kind of philosophical question. Is this, the period we're living in right now, the golden age of entrepreneurship?
When you say golden age, does that imply that it's the gilded age in the sense of it's coming to an end?
No, I mean kind of the opposite, I think. It's so much easier and cheaper to start a company now than it ever was. So this is a period in which entrepreneurship, which might have been thwarted in other times, can really flourish.
I don't agree. I think great entrepreneurs find a way no matter what. Hoorah. I think this is a great time to start a business, but I think there's two predominant things that make it really tough. I think the first one is the ease of information. While it's easier to start a company today because you have access to cloud computing and servers and all kinds of things, so do your competitors, and so do your customers, and so do your suppliers. I mean, you can find out almost anything about anything today. And so I think it really levels the playing field. When I started my first business, I was able to buy one server. And as we made more money, we bought more servers. And the fact that we had $80,000 worth of servers and my little competitors didn't was a barrier to entry. Because if you wanted to compete with me as a ISP, an internet provider, you had to buy $80,000 worth of servers. And then Bell Canada came along and bought, $20 million worth of servers. So I was kind of screwed. Today, for $200 a month or $50 a month, you get access to the same computing power as the biggest company in the world. So I think it's a very great leveler, which makes it even harder to add value. Value today has to be clear, and you have to accept the fact that whatever your value today is, it's completely unsustainable. Because the world is so competitive today that if you're better, faster, stronger, a year from now, if you're not better, faster, stronger, you're going to get your ass kicked.
I know you're an admirer of fellow shark Mark Cuban's saying that every day somebody wakes up with the sole purpose of wanting to kick your butt.
Yeah, there's a saying above my desk in Toronto, written in granite, and it says, every day somebody wakes up with the sole intention of kicking your ass. And I love that. I also love the saying that the bigger you are, the bigger the target on your back. And it's true. So I think that makes it harder. I think the other thing that makes it harder is the media today has created the impression the wealth is easy. So, like, my 22-year-old son and his buddies are sitting around, and they're going to start a business. They don't come to me for advice. Right? They're like, oh, we got to go see somebody that knows business. Do you know anybody? Do you know anybody? So I'm like, okay, so what are you guys going to do? And they're, oh, we're going to start this business. It's an app. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. I'm like, really? And what are you going to do with it? And they go, we're going to sell it one day. I'm like, wow, that's great. How much are you going to sell it for? We're going to sell it for $1 billion. I'm like, wow. And I go, what if you only sell it for $50 million? And they're like, oh, we're not losers. So I'm like, really? I go, do you guys even know how much $1 billion is? They're like, you know, it's okay. And I'm like, it's $10,000 a day since the day Christ was born. So think about that. And they have no concept because they read in the media about Snapchat being worth 18 billion and this being worth 10. So the words of money have made it seem that if you don't rise to that level, you're a loser and it's so easy. Whereas I think before, if you started a company and you made a good living, pat on the back. But today, it's kind of like, oh, unless you sell it for, you know, at least $1 billion, it's immaterial. And I think that makes it harder because the expectations are harder. And I think it forces a lot of people into business for wealth. Now, Kevin will say to you, it's always about the bottom line and profit. I always think great companies are built for great purpose. And great companies are built for great vision. And I don't think anybody works for so many years that hard just to get a bigger paycheck. I mean, I think at the beginning we do, because like John Paul said, you got to pay the rent. But beyond that, what keeps you going?
What keeps you going? What keeps Herjavec Group going?
Opportunity. You know, we are in one of the fastest growing segments in the world. And the greatest thing, I think, one of the greatest things about our business is we have a lot of people that have been with us for a long time, a core group of people. And we started the company 12 years ago, and we thought we would do $5 million the first year. We were confident of that. In fact, we were so confident that we spent towards that budget. At the end of the year, we did one thing right. We spent the $1 million we thought we would spend, but we only sold $400,000. It was awful, Eric. It was awful. I mean, I went back and we started cold calling on the phone, all that stuff. So it took us 5 years to get to 6.2 million. And in the next 5 years, we got to about 150 million, which we finished last year at about. And so what inspires us is to make that journey. And now we're global. We have offices in the US, we have offices in the UK, Australia. Is I look at it and I have competitors that are doing billions. And I look at that and I say, why not me? Why not us? If they can do it, why can't we do it? You know, I was at Nike this morning and you walk on that facility and it's so motivating. You know, like there's the Mia Hamm building and there's the Tiger Woods building. And I don't care about the athletes. I think Phil Knight stood here 44 years ago and said, I'm going to build this. And I think, yeah, baby. You know, like how motivating was that?
That is great. All right, let's talk about risk, because you live with it. As an entrepreneur, you live with it. Jumping into a company, one of the riskiest things you can do. And you in particular, you race, or did, race fast cars, ride motorcycles, start a company where you've got billion-dollar competitors. What's the right way to think about risk for all the people here who are thinking about scaling or starting a company?
Yeah, I think it's really true. Without risk, there really is no reward. But I'm a big believer in measured risk and failing quickly. I'm also a big believer in more action, less talk. So just do it. I mean, I would rather try and fail and get up again. People try and they fail and they pause. And they look and they say, wow, I got the crap kicked out of me. And I got rejected. And people laughed at me. And they made fun of me. And I lost a little bit of money. And it's embarrassing. And what will people think? Oh, and I may not do it again. I fail, and I just get up again. I don't allow myself the time to dwell on misery. Because what I've learned is nobody cares. Nobody cares. You know, well, as an entrepreneur, I don't really think your spouse, unless she's in the business with you, cares that much. I don't think your kids care that much. I mean, they love you and they're very supportive, but do they really want to hear how you screwed up the accounting system and lost your... They don't. And, as an owner, your employees care, but there's a limit. They really don't want to hear the bad news because they have a job. They want to know there'll be a company tomorrow. I think it's very lonely, but you've just got to go. You have to accept the fact you're not the smartest, you're not the tallest, you're not the best, whatever, but just go. And the people that are achieving great things, John Paul, my little company, we are no better than anybody else. It simply comes down to the price that you're willing to pay on that road. And that's it.
That's really inspiring. Thanks. We did a survey of the Inc. 5000, the owners of the fastest growing companies in America, and there were 3 characteristics in which they were totally beyond the pale compared to everybody else, even smaller entrepreneurs. Risk-taking, willingness to take risk, focus on their business, and, most relevant to what you just said, determination. They just would never give up.
Wow. It's so interesting. We're talking about the mission here that Eric and I were talking. So I support a homeless shelter here and have for a number of years called Union Gospel Mission. And a couple of years ago, I went through it's a long story, but I went through a rough time, and my priest sent me to this mission. And I wanted to, I'm so extreme, so I felt like if I didn't help another human being, my life had no value. And so I wanted to go to Africa and work with Ebola patients. And so I called one of my friends who's a priest, and he's like, what? He goes, how about we, come back off the ledge, and how about something a little closer to home? And I'm like, look, what? And he goes, well, I have a friend of mine. He runs all the homeless shelters for the state. And I'm like, Seattle? I've never been to Seattle. Why would I want to go to Seattle? And that afternoon, I was on a plane, and I ended up spending quite a bit of time at the Union Gospel Mission, which is really not a very nice place in not a very great neighborhood, surrounded by a lot of affluence, right? Because the area is becoming gentrified, and there's these, you have this homeless mission, and across the street you have an art gallery now selling $20,000 art pieces. I mean, it's really a contrast for what's happening in Seattle, especially downtown. But long story made short, it's a Christian homeless shelter, and it's a 1-year program for addiction recovery. And people there are from stories you can't imagine. Abuse, just horrific stuff that a guy like me had never encountered. And so the one thing, after you spend a lot of time with people like that really hits you is the determination. Because, you know, you always get to a point in your life where you think, woe is me. My life sucks. This happened, that happened. Oh. And then I come over here and I meet a guy who was abused when he was 8 years old and ended up on the streets at 11, became a heroin addict, and got thrown around foster homes, ended up homeless for years, and now he's in this recovery program that he graduated from, and he's helping others. And he's the most positive, happy guy and determined that you can imagine. And that was a real, like, bang moment for me, because I'm like, if anybody has any right to feel sorry for themselves, it's Richard. And because I went there feeling really sorry for myself and thinking, oh, I screwed this up and I screwed that up, and life has kind of kicked me and blah. And then you meet him, and it's determination. And the one thing he really said to me, which I really believe in, and it's actually an Isaac Asimov quote that said, as long as there is life, there is hope. And when you're at that level where a lot of these people are, you've got to build on that level of determination. You just got to believe that tomorrow will be better than today. And you just got to believe that you can add value and you have purpose and you got to keep going. And so I think it's all about determination.
Let me ask. Yeah.
Or profit, as Kevin would say. Determination and profit.
Let me ask you a question about immigration. So you've seen that particular issue from both sides. As a business owner, as an immigrant yourself, what would you say if you were president? How would you change immigration policy? Oh, well, one more thing I meant to mention, too, is that you and I are working together on a show called Inspiration Chronicles, the focus of which is entrepreneurs who were born in another country and have made it great here. Really inspirational stories. So, you're president. How would you change immigration policy?
There's two things. I think we need to screen better for things that are a danger, security. So I'm a security guy. That's my first thing. But the flip side of it is, for me, it's about openness. My experience is very personal, and, I love America. I'm Canadian, but to me, I live in LA now, this country is the bastion of hope. I mean, I remember my dad, when I was a young kid, talking about how great America was and the opportunity. And it was this idyllic, far-off land where you could be anything you want to be and you could achieve anything you want to achieve. And he used to talk about it like that. So when we escaped from Yugoslavia, we get to Italy and we apply to come to America, and America turns us down. And we go to Canada. So my view is, open up the borders. Let people in. I don't think people come to America for less opportunity. I think my experience with most immigrants is people come here for hope and people come here for opportunity. And I would rather risk the small percentage that don't come here for that than lose missing out on the next great entrepreneur.
Great. Thank you. I know that you all have questions for Robert, and so let's turn the session over to the floor. Are there floor mics out there? Yes, there are. And maybe you can bring the house lights up a bit so that people can see. Questions for Robert about Shark Tank, about life, about motivation?
About Dancing with the Stars?
Right. Let's get down to the serious stuff.
Let's talk about serious business. Yeah.
Robert, you spoke about how it used to be
Sir, could I ask you to say where you're from and what your company is?
Morris Tabush from New York City, in the managed services, IT, and security business. Not quite at 150 million yet, but hopefully one day.
Horrible business. You should get out of it. It sucks. There's no money in it.
You spoke about the whole thing with building an app, selling it for a few $1 billion versus just going out, building a business and earning a living. I've done the latter, not the former. What are your thoughts on the whole unicorn economy and the valuations and what's been happening lately where these unicorns are all of a sudden getting deflated?
Well, I think that the reason the game...
Right. Let's get down to the serious stuff.
Let's talk about serious business. Yeah. Robert, the game deflated is because the investors, one is there's too many of them, so there's over...
Another question.
Meredith Karam, AT&T from Dallas.
And secondly, I think part of the reason the unicorns have so much value is they're not selling to a public market that's determining their value. They're selling to each other. So many of the VCs are going through multiple rounds. So I think it's different. If I have a big VC firm and I want to get Eric's big VC firm to invest in me, all I got to do is convince him that the next guy he's going to sell it to, the value is going to go up. And there hasn't been any public exit of these companies. So I just think it's a slice in time. Some of these are, like, look at Uber, they have great revenue. But I think a lot of these companies are going to have a challenge because there's no public IPO happening right now for many reasons.
Another question.
Meredith Karam, AT&T from Dallas. I'm a growth leader and greatness enabler for AT&T, and I'm a big fan.
What a great title.
Oh, thanks. I made that up. Thank you. And I love the Shark Tank, and even so beyond the tank, and really showing, the American dream and that nobody sets limits on yourself other than yourself. But in watching the tank, it's obviously fiercely competitive. And so tell us a little bit about Mark Cuban's ego.
Once you get comfortable with Mark's ego, he's a good guy. I wouldn't say he necessarily has a big ego, but Mark is definitely boom. And he's definitely full on all the time. And I really admire that. And I hate to admit it, but that's one quality I've learned from him. The guy is always selling, and he is definitely in your face, full speed, go. And I think at times I wasn't. So it's a lot of fun because you have such different characteristics of people, but we're human beings. So sometimes he's nice, sometimes he's mean, just like Kevin. I've seen Kevin do stuff that was remarkable, and then I've seen Kevin kick a puppy. So, which I found more in character. And, I think that's the great thing about us is we're just human, and we're really no special than anybody else, and we're all self-made. And I think that's why the show works. It's interesting. You watch Shark Tank, the ratings are very high. Beyond the Tank, the ratings, not so much. And I love Beyond the Tank. Because for me, Beyond the Tank, which is the follow-up show, is about the nitty-gritty execution part of business. But people in general, this audience will probably love Beyond the Tank. But the general audience is more about the drama of just asking for the money and that interaction. The non-sexy part of actually running the business, most people don't care. They just assume, you get the money, you kiss the prince, and you live happily ever after. Oh, you actually have to work? And by the way, a lot of our entrepreneurs that we invest in, a quick funny story, I'll never forget, I think it was Mark and I did a deal in the second season. We gave somebody $150,000, and we're going through due diligence, and we blah, 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 and we're like, so what are you going to do with the money? And the guy's like, pay off my car. And we're like, no. The company, the money goes into the company to grow the business. And he was like, oh. Right. So it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. I think that is where we'll have to end it. Robert, we could talk to you all day.
Oh, thank you very much,
terrific.
Eric. Always a
And
pleasure.
You have really followed through on the inspiration. Thanks so much. Thanks for being who you
thank
are.
you.
Thanks for all you've done for entrepreneurs.
Cheers.
John Paul, and all the speakers we had today. Thanks from CNBC and from Inc. to all of them. And thanks to all of you. Good luck with the companies. Good luck with the tough path you've taken. God bless.